The early morning sun burned golden over the rooftops of Charleston, South Carolina, but the warmth could not reach the chill that had settled in Emily Whitman's chest. Even after 24 years, the memories of that night in 1998 remained vivid. The phone call that changed everything. The sudden disappearance of her younger sister, Grace. Grace Whitman, 25, full of life, laughter, and the kind of brilliance that made every classroom brighter. Grace had dreams, hopes, a future that seemed limitless. And then, just like that, she was gone. Vanished. And the world moved on. Everyone moved on, everyone but Emily. Before diving in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest cold case stories. She still remembered the small apartment where Grace had lived. The one with the blue shutters and the tiny balcony overlooking the courtyard. Emily had climbed the stairs that night, her hands shaking as she pounded on the door, calling her sister's name, only to find it locked and silent. The neighbors had seen Grace leave earlier in the evening, wearing a light coat and carrying her favorite leather satchel. She had told Emily she was going to meet someone she trusted. Emily had asked who, and Grace had smiled, brushing her hair behind her ear, saying, "Just someone I met. It's nothing to worry about." That smile haunted Emily. For weeks, Emily combed the city for any sign, any clue. She went to the police immediately, desperate, frantic, but even her determination met walls. Detective Harold Briggs had been assigned to the case, a seasoned officer who had seen his fair share of disappearances. He was thorough, methodical, and compassionate, or so it seemed, but Briggs had his limits, and Charleston in 1998 was a city where money and influence often overshadowed justice. "The trail's cold, Emily," Briggs had told her with a sympathetic frown. "We've looked everywhere. Friends, co-workers, even some of the local hangouts. Grace isn't answering, and we're hitting dead ends." Emily had felt the weight of disbelief pressing down on her chest. Dead ends. That was all anyone had for her sister. Yet Emily refused to accept it. Every night she pored over every scrap of memory, every note Grace had left behind, every photograph, every letter. She became a historian of her sister's life, documenting, cataloging, searching for a single thread that might unravel the mystery. And decades passed. The city changed, people moved on. Grace's friends aged, married, moved away. But Emily Whitman never did. She became the keeper of the truth that no one else wanted to face. Meanwhile, Detective Olivia Kane stared at the old manila folder in front of her. The label read, "Whitman, Grace, 1998. Disappearance, cold case." She traced the faded ink with her finger, reading the details of a case long considered unsolvable. Kane was 32 now, sharp, meticulous, and relentless. She had grown up fascinated by unsolved mysteries, driven by a need to give voice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. The Whitman file was different. It wasn't just another cold case. It had the smell of injustice, of power protecting itself, and of a young woman's life stolen before it had even begun. She opened the folder carefully, the papers crackling with age. Photographs of Grace smiled back at her, hair dark and shiny, eyes bright with mischief, standing in front of her classroom, surrounded by children who adored her. Reports from the original investigation were filled with painstaking detail, but also gaps. Notes from Detective Briggs, the original lead investigator, showed careful work, yet missing pieces loomed like shadows. A witness who suddenly moved away, surveillance footage that never existed, statements that contradicted one another. There were mentions of influential friends, of Grace attending parties with members of Charleston's elite, hints at a life that connected her to powerful people. One name appeared repeatedly, Aaron Caldwell, a wealthy businessman known for philanthropy, political influence, and a reputation as untouchable. Kane leaned back in her chair, a shiver running down her spine. Cases like these weren't just about piecing together evidence, they were about navigating a maze of social hierarchies, protecting the vulnerable, and confronting those who had power enough to bury the truth. Her partner, Marcus Hale, entered the office carrying a mug of coffee, the aroma cutting through the musty scent of decades-old paperwork. "You're looking at that file like it's going to tell you its secrets," he said lightly, though his eyes betrayed concern. "It's not just any file," Kane said, her voice low. "Grace Whitman, 25, disappeared in '98. Investigators were forced to close the case without answers. But there's something here, Marcus, something they missed, something everyone else refused to see." Marcus sat down, setting the coffee beside her. "You think it's solvable?" "I think it's solvable if we pay attention to what everyone else ignored. The connections, the relationships, the people with something to hide," Kane replied. "And I think someone very powerful is at the center of this." Meanwhile, Emily Whitman received another envelope in the mail that morning. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a photograph she didn't recognize at first. It showed Grace, smiling, but standing with a man she didn't know. Tall, distinguished, impeccably dressed. Her heart thumped painfully. The photograph was taken the week before Grace's disappearance, and the handwriting on the back was unmistakable. "For your eyes only. A.C. Aaron Caldwell." Emily's blood ran cold. After all these years, the shadow of Aaron Caldwell still lingered over Grace's life, and now, her death. Kane had also reviewed statements from witnesses who had long been dismissed. Rachel Myers, Grace's best friend, had given conflicting accounts in 1998. Some of her testimony had been deemed unreliable, but Kane had noticed subtle patterns in Rachel's recollections, inconsistencies that suggested she had been protecting someone, or had been too afraid to reveal what she knew. Kane made a note to track her down. The original case notes painted a picture of a young woman caught in circumstances far larger than herself. Detective Harold Briggs, a diligent officer, had faced political pressure to close the case quickly. Sheriff Conrad Mills, with ties to the Caldwell family, had insisted that resources be redirected. Certain leads, like a man named Vincent Duca, who worked at one of Aaron Caldwell's properties, had been overlooked entirely. Threats had been subtle but clear: pursue this too hard, and you could ruin your career. Briggs had followed the rules, but he had failed Grace, and he had carried that failure with him for the rest of his life. In the present, Kane knew she could finish what Briggs couldn't. She could follow every thread, check every detail with modern forensic techniques, and leverage public attention to compel cooperation. Dr. Lena Foster, a forensic specialist, was already working on exhumed remains connected to other cold cases, and her methods could shed new light on evidence previously considered useless. ADA Claire Rojas had agreed to oversee any prosecution, ensuring the law would finally take its course. And Maya Reed, a determined true crime journalist, had promised to bring the story to public attention, increasing pressure on anyone attempting to hide the truth. As Kane read through Grace's case notes, she noticed something else. A series of letters Grace had written but never sent. They were stored in a locked filing cabinet in the original police department, notes to people she had trusted, expressing fears, suspicions, and fragments of her final days. One particular note stood out. She had mentioned a meeting with Aaron Caldwell, a dinner he had promised to arrange, a trip he suggested she take alone, and her unease about being isolated in unfamiliar surroundings. The language was subtle, almost casual, but the undertone of anxiety was unmistakable. Kane felt her pulse quicken. This was more than a disappearance. This was premeditation. Someone powerful had manipulated Grace's trust, lured her away, and ensured she was vulnerable. The question was, who else was involved, and how far did they go to conceal the truth? Emily Whitman, unaware of Kane's progress, had decided to visit the old locations where Grace was last seen. She stopped at Grace's former apartment, now long vacant, the peeling paint and faded curtains a silent testament to the years that had passed. She ran her fingers along the window ledge, recalling the last conversation she had with her sister. "Emily, I'll be back soon," Grace had said, smiling, oblivious to the danger waiting for her. Emily's heart ached at the memory. Kane made her first call to Rachel Myers, who now lived out of state. "Rachel, this is Detective Olivia Kane. I'm reopening the Whitman case. I need you to come in and talk about what you remember. Every detail matters." There was a long pause on the other end. I've tried to forget, Rachel said finally, her voice trembling. But I'll come. I owe Grace that much. The renewed investigation began to move. Kane and Marcus Hale reviewed every piece of old evidence, cross-referencing witness statements with modern records. They traced financial transactions, checking for anything unusual tied to Aaron Caldwell or his associates. Bank records revealed small but suspicious transfers to employees who had been in contact with Grace in her final days. The trail was faint, but it was there. Dr. Lena Foster prepared to examine Grace's personal effects, preserved by Emily and others, looking for DNA evidence, fibers, or anything that might provide a tangible connection to her disappearance. Maya Reed began to research and compile a timeline, planning her first article on the cold case, hoping to bring renewed public attention and force hidden players into the light. Kane felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She knew this wouldn't be easy. Powerful people didn't like being exposed, and some would do anything to protect their secrets. But she also knew that Grace Whitman had lived, laughed, and loved, and that the world owed her justice. And somewhere, hidden behind the wealth and influence of Aaron Caldwell, a truth that had been buried for 24 years was waiting to surface. This was just the beginning. The morning air in Charleston was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the harbor into the city streets. Detective Olivia Kane parked her unmarked SUV in front of a small cafe on King Street, Marcus Hale beside her. The cold case folder rested heavily in her lap, a weight of decades of unanswered questions pressing against her chest. Grace Whitman had vanished in 1998, 24 years ago, leaving nothing but whispers, speculation, and a family still aching for truth. Emily Whitman, now in her mid-50s, had never stopped looking. Olivia could see why. The younger Whitman had been radiant, full of life, with laughter that could fill a room and a sense of curiosity that made everyone around her notice her. It was easy to understand how a small-town disappearance could ripple through time when the victim was so vividly alive in everyone's memory. "First stop," Olivia said, closing the folder and tucking it under her arm. Rachel Myers. She knew Grace better than anyone outside the family. Marcus nodded, checking his phone. "I've read through her statement from 24 years ago. She was interviewed multiple times by Detective Briggs, but there's hesitation there, something she didn't or couldn't say." The cafe was small, tucked between a boutique and a bookstore. The smell of coffee and baked bread mingled in the sunlight spilling through the front windows. Rachel Myers sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her eyes, sharp, wary, and burdened, hadn't lost their intensity. Olivia and Marcus slid into the booth opposite her. "Rachel Myers?" Olivia began gently. "Detective Olivia Kane, this is Detective Marcus Hale. We're reinvestigating the disappearance of Grace Whitman." Rachel stiffened, her eyes darting to the folder Olivia rested on the table. "I thought that was closed. I thought everyone had moved on." Emily Whitman's voice, when it came, was softer than Olivia expected. "Some of us never moved on, Rachel. Not really, not a day." Rachel's lips pressed together. She hesitated, swallowing. I didn't know what I could say back then. Grace trusted me, but I didn't know how to protect her without getting us both into trouble." Olivia leaned in, her voice calm but insistent. "Whatever you know now, we need. Anything, no judgment. No one is in trouble for coming forward." Rachel's gaze flickered between Olivia and Marcus. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "It started the night before she disappeared. Grace was nervous, almost jittery. She kept checking her phone, pacing around my apartment. She mentioned she had plans, but she didn't say with whom. I didn't push. I shouldn't have ignored it, but I didn't. I thought she was just seeing Daniel." "Daniel Mercer?" Marcus asked. Rachel nodded. "Yes, her boyfriend at the time. He seemed possessive, but he wasn't violent. I never suspected he'd do anything to her, but everyone in town did. Gossip got out of hand fast. When she disappeared, people whispered all sorts of things about him. He was questioned, harassed, his life was ruined for months, and he didn't even know what hit him." Olivia exchanged a glance with Marcus. "Was there anyone else in her life? Someone she mentioned more privately, someone you noticed she might have been afraid of? Rachel hesitated again. There was someone. Aaron Caldwell. He was intimidating, wealthy. His presence at school functions or local charity events always had Grace on edge. She didn't trust him, and she mentioned once that he made her uncomfortable at a fundraiser. But she didn't say much. She didn't want to cause a scene. I always thought it was just, the difference in social circles. Rich businessman versus a regular teacher. Her hands trembled around her mug. I think she was afraid of him in ways she didn't even tell me. Marcus scribbled notes. Olivia felt a chill. Aaron Caldwell. The name had appeared in a few of the older reports, but had never been thoroughly investigated. Too powerful, too connected, too easy to ignore. Do you remember anything else from that week? Olivia asked, pressing gently. Anything small? A letter? A gift? A visit? Something she might have kept private? Rachel's eyes softened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. I kept this. I thought maybe someday it might matter. Olivia took it carefully, noting the cursive handwriting on the front. Grace. Inside were several letters, unsigned but with a confident, commanding tone, urging Grace to attend social events, meet people she didn't know, and hinting at opportunities that seemed enticing but vague. The subtext was clear: manipulation. Quiet, subtle, dangerous. They were just trying to control me, in a way that I didn't understand, Rachel said quietly. I didn't see it at the time, but looking back, I realized she was being pulled into something bigger than just teenage drama. Olivia nodded, feeling the tension in the room tighten. Every piece of the puzzle mattered. Every overlooked detail could now, in the light of modern investigation, reveal truths that had been buried for decades. Later that day, Olivia and Marcus returned to the precinct, the office buzzing with the low hum of computer fans and fluorescent lights. Dr. Lena Foster had been waiting, her laptop open, multiple monitors displaying layers of evidence, photographs, archived forensic reports, and digital recreations of Grace's last known whereabouts. Morning, Marcus said. We have a few items from Rachel Myers, letters, some photos, nothing too groundbreaking yet, but potentially useful. Dr. Foster didn't look up. Letters are valuable, even if old. Handwriting analysis, paper type, ink, any latent fingerprints. Modern forensics can work wonders on materials from the late 90s. Olivia set the letters on the table. Can you run anything? Fingerprints? DNA? Lena examined the envelopes, her gloved hands delicate. The ink is ballpoint, but some smudges on the second letter could be skin cells. I can do a mitochondrial DNA test. Might not give a perfect match, but it's better than nothing. Marcus leaned back. We also got another lead, Lydia Caldwell, Aaron's wife. She's come forward quietly, mentions things about her husband's dealings during the time Grace disappeared. Nothing concrete yet, but she's willing to talk if it doesn't risk exposure. Olivia raised an eyebrow. That could be the breakthrough. Every small clue matters. Flashback. 1998. Grace Whitman's apartment. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, dust motes floating in the air. Grace sat at her desk, writing in her journal, her thoughts scattered. Daniel Mercer's voice echoed faintly in her memory. A loving boyfriend. Innocent. But she couldn't shake the anxiety that had settled like a stone in her chest. She had felt watched, followed, the eyes of someone much older, someone with influence, lingering at school events, at fundraisers. She tore a page from the journal, folding it into a small envelope, and whispered to herself, I can't let them control me. Back in 2022, Olivia read Rachel's notes alongside the old journal entries, seeing patterns emerge. Aaron Caldwell's name appeared indirectly through invitations, gifts, and community events. A pattern of influence, control, and subtle intimidation. The next morning, Olivia and Marcus visited Lydia Caldwell at her townhouse in Charleston's historic district. The building had been recently renovated, sunlight glinting off the exposed brick and polished hardwood floors. Lydia, in her late 60s, moved with quiet dignity, though the traces of unease in her posture betrayed decades of knowing and withholding. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," Olivia began. "Anything you can tell us about Aaron during 1998 could help us finally understand what happened to Grace Whitman." Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. "It's been hard. I didn't know the extent of what happened at the time. Aaron was complicated, charismatic, commanding, but there were shadows. I knew Grace was frightened at certain events. She never told me why, but I could see it in her eyes." Olivia pressed further. "Did Aaron ever act in ways you found alarming? To Grace? To anyone?" Lydia swallowed. There were times he arranged things that seemed innocent. A dinner, a ride to an event. But I noticed the fear in people around him, Grace especially. I didn't realize it then. I only put it together years later when I was sorting through old documents, letters, and calendars. I saw the nights he insisted Grace attend certain events, and the timing, it doesn't align with coincidence." Marcus noted every word, scanning Lydia for inconsistencies but found only a quiet sorrow in her eyes. Meanwhile, Dr. Lena Foster was in the lab, sleeves rolled up. She had isolated DNA from the letters and, more importantly, from remnants found on Grace's belongings recovered years later. Hair, fingerprints, a faint trace on a partially burned envelope. "Marcus, Olivia, this is huge. We may have partial profiles, enough to cross-check with known associates of Caldwell or other suspects. If we're lucky, we might confirm who had direct access to Grace in those final days." Olivia felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the tangible breakthrough they had been waiting for. Evidence, witnesses, and modern forensics coming together after 24 years of frustration and false leads. Flashback, 1998, Grace's last known day. She had attended her usual classes at the elementary school, smiling at her students, carefully hiding the worry that had taken root over the previous weeks. Rachel Myers met her afterward, noticing Grace's distracted demeanor. Grace pulled out a small envelope. "Keep this safe," she said softly. "I don't know who I can trust." Emily Whitman, distant from these moments yet ever vigilant, had called Rachel that day, sensing something was off. Little did anyone know. The events that evening would spiral into tragedy, an evening filled with letters, hidden intentions, and a web of influence reaching far beyond their small town. Present day, Olivia and Marcus compiled the interviews, letters, and DNA reports. "We're piecing together a sequence," Olivia said, staring at the wall covered with timelines and photos. Grace's movements, Rachel's recollections, Lydia's hints, and the forensic evidence. Aaron Caldwell is at the center. His network, his influence, everything points to him knowing more than he let on. Marcus rubbed his temples. "We're on the cusp. One solid connection and we can finally link the past to the present." Olivia nodded, a mix of determination and exhaustion settling over her. "We've opened the door. Now it's time to see who walks through." The day ended with Olivia walking through the streets of Charleston, the city quiet as dusk settled. She held Rachel's envelope, feeling the weight of Grace's unseen hand guiding them toward the truth. Somewhere, decades later, justice was waiting, and Olivia Kane would not rest until it was delivered. Detective Olivia Kane sat in the unmarked car outside the Caldwell estate, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Marcus Hale leaned back in the passenger seat, scanning the sprawling property through binoculars. The estate was a fortress of wealth. Manicured lawns, wrought iron gates, security cameras blinking silently in the late afternoon sun. Aaron Caldwell had always been untouchable in Charleston, a man who smiled at charity events while hiding ruthless power behind the facade. Now, he was the key to unraveling a decades-old mystery. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Olivia exhaled slowly. "We're not just confronting a suspect, we're confronting a man who built a lifetime of influence on fear, manipulation, and secrecy. I need to be ready for anything." Inside the Caldwell estate, Lydia Caldwell sat in her sunlit living room, the faint hum of an air conditioner blending with the ticking of a grandfather clock. She had agreed to meet Olivia today, understanding that what she knew could finally expose the truth behind Grace Whitman's disappearance. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. Years of silence and compliance had worn her down, but now she felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her. The doorbell rang, and Lydia's heart jumped. Olivia and Marcus were escorted inside. "Miss Caldwell," Olivia began, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I know this isn't easy. We're reopening the investigation into Grace Whitman's disappearance in 1998. Every piece of information you provide is crucial." Lydia nodded, her voice trembling. I've kept quiet for so long. I didn't know who to trust, but I can't keep it in any longer. Grace deserved better. She deserved justice." Marcus placed a notebook on the table. "Anything you remember about Aaron during that time? Events, interactions, his behavior around Grace? It all matters." Lydia exhaled, eyes filling with tears. "He was charming to the public, philanthropic, always the gentleman. But privately, he was controlling. He would insist that Grace attend social events, dinner parties, fundraisers. She resisted sometimes, and he would grow impatient, subtle threats, veiled warnings. I thought I was protecting her by keeping quiet, not realizing I was just enabling him." Olivia listened intently. "Did he ever directly confront her or anyone else who tried to help her?" Lydia swallowed. "I saw him once in the school parking lot, arguing quietly with Grace. I didn't understand what they were saying. I never should have assumed it was harmless. I only realized its significance years later, after finding old notes, schedules, and letters he'd hidden from me. It was meticulous. Planned." Flashback. 1998. Grace Whitman walked through the school courtyard, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. Rachel Myers caught up with her. "Grace, are you okay?" Rachel asked, noticing her friend's jittery movements. I don't know. I think he's watching me," Grace whispered. "Aaron, he's everywhere. He shows up at events I didn't invite him to. I feel like I can't move without him knowing." Rachel's eyes widened. "Do you think he'd hurt you?" Grace shook her head, her face pale. "No, not yet. But the fear, it's constant. He controls things without me realizing. And Daniel, he can't protect me." Present day, Olivia and Marcus processed Lydia's revelations. "This gives us context," Olivia said, pacing the office. Grace wasn't just frightened of rumors or a controlling boyfriend. She was being subtly manipulated and cornered by someone with real power, Aaron Caldwell. And now we have Lydia corroborating the behavioral patterns. Marcus nodded. "But we need proof beyond witness testimony. Something tangible that links him to her disappearance or the attempts to cover it up." Maya Reed, a journalist whose true crime reporting had gained national attention, met Olivia later that afternoon in a downtown cafe. Maya's laptop displayed headlines from local and national outlets. "Detective Kane, I've been digging. The public's fascinated by the Whitman case. Pressure is building. People want answers. If your investigation yields results, the spotlight is on you and Aaron Caldwell. He's going to feel the heat." Olivia leaned forward. "We're not here for theatrics, Maya. We're here for justice. But yes, public scrutiny could help us uncover things that political and social power have kept hidden for decades." Maya smirked. "Consider me your megaphone." A few days later, Olivia and Marcus stood at the crime lab with Dr. Lena Foster. The lab was filled with the hum of centrifuges, computers, and the faint antiseptic smell of chemical cleaners. Dr. Foster was examining artifacts recovered from the site in Nassau, where new bodies and items connected to Grace's disappearance had recently been discovered. "Olivia, Marcus, the preservation conditions were poor, but we've recovered fibers, hair fragments, and partial DNA profiles. Some of this directly links to people who were in contact with Grace in her last days," Dr. Foster explained. She tapped a screen, highlighting strands of hair and traces of fingerprints. "We're also comparing these with historical samples, letters, and personal items. Some profiles are new, people not previously questioned thoroughly. We may have overlooked key players in 1998. Olivia frowned. "This could reopen a Pandora's box. We need to be careful. But it's exactly what we need to pin down Caldwell and anyone who helped cover this up." Flashback. Nassau, 1998. a private beach behind a small resort. Grace stood alone, clutching her bag, wary of someone approaching. A man in a suit who appeared friendly offered her guidance and hospitality, but she recoiled. Inside the shadows, subtle threats loomed. Grace didn't know who to trust. Every friendly face could conceal intentions. Every gesture could be manipulation. She wrote in her journal later that night, "I don't know who I can rely on. I feel trapped, but I have to be careful. Someone is watching. Someone wants me silenced." Back in Charleston, Olivia and Marcus reviewed surveillance footage and old police reports. The threads of the case were beginning to weave together. Olivia tapped a screen. "Look at this. 1998. Night before she vanished. Security camera at a fundraiser shows Aaron Caldwell arriving shortly after Grace. He walks past her several times, but there's a subtle signal, a hand gesture, a glance, that indicates he's monitoring her movements closely. Rachel saw it too, but it wasn't reported. No one realized the significance." Marcus's brow furrowed. "We've underestimated how far his influence reached. Political power, social power, even connections in law enforcement at the time. This was meticulous." That evening, Olivia drove to meet Emily Whitman. The older woman had aged gracefully, but her eyes retained the intensity of someone who had carried grief for decades. She welcomed Olivia into her home, photographs of Grace lining the walls. "Detective Kane," Emily began, "thank you for keeping it this. I can't tell you how many times I thought we'd never find answers. But now, we have hope. Rachel's interview, Lydia's courage, new forensic evidence, it all points toward the truth." Olivia nodded. "We're seeing patterns we didn't before. Aaron Caldwell controlled so much, even after Grace disappeared. But the pieces are coming together, Emily. We're close." Emily's hands shook slightly as she handed Olivia a worn envelope. "I found this among Grace's old things. She'd written it, but never sent it. She wanted someone to know if something happened." Olivia opened it carefully. Inside were notes about specific threats, mentions of dinners, events, and a feeling of being trapped. Names were hinted at but never explicit. Every line, however, revealed Grace's fear and the subtle coercion she endured. The following day, Jonathan Pierce, Aaron Caldwell's defense attorney, made his presence known. The office phones rang incessantly as he demanded meetings, threatening legal action, warning of media interference, and pressuring for a halt to the investigation. ADA Claire Rojas stood firm beside Olivia, prepared for the eventual courtroom confrontation. "Detective Kane," Claire said, "Pierce is good, very good, but we have to remain methodical. Every move he makes is predictable. Document everything, anticipate threats, and keep the evidence airtight." Olivia exhaled. "He's trying to intimidate us. That's expected. But Caldwell's time hiding behind wealth and influence is ending. We have witnesses, we have forensic evidence, and now we have Lydia willing to corroborate what she saw and discovered." Rachel Myers came forward again, this time revealing the hidden truths she'd kept buried. She recounted the night Grace disappeared in detail, the final interactions with Daniel Mercer, the subtle but unmistakable presence of Aaron Caldwell, and the whispers that Grace was being maneuvered into a situation from which she could not escape. "I didn't want to believe it," Rachel confessed. "I didn't want to think Aaron could go that far, but looking back, everything points to him. Every time Grace said she was scared, every time she tried to confide in me, he was there, controlling the narrative without anyone knowing." Olivia and Marcus returned to the lab with Dr. Foster, examining new artifacts recovered from Nassau. Among the items, fragments of clothing, partial jewelry, and a locket bearing initials matching Grace's handwriting. Fibers found on the items matched the envelope Rachel had provided. DNA testing revealed partial matches to Aaron Caldwell's associates at the time. "It's indirect but strong," Dr. Foster said. "We can establish presence, opportunity, and indirect involvement. Combined with Lydia's testimony and Rachel's account, we have a compelling case." Olivia's jaw tightened. "We need Caldwell to feel pressure without tipping him off. We continue gathering proof, cross-referencing dates, events, and all personal correspondences." Flashback, 1998. Detective Harold Briggs at the Charleston PD. He reviewed notes on Grace Whitman's disappearance, aware of Aaron Caldwell's influence and political connections. Sheriff Conrad Mills had warned him repeatedly to close the case. Briggs' frustration was palpable. He wanted to pursue justice, but the forces working against him were enormous. Present day, Maya Reed prepared an article for publication. Grace Whitman, the cold case that could unmask Charleston's power elite. The first paragraphs highlighted Grace's life, the original 1998 investigation, and the ongoing breakthroughs by Olivia Kane. Maya's reporting stirred the public, causing whispers in political and social circles, amplifying the pressure on Aaron Caldwell. Olivia read the draft. Maya's work is invaluable. This keeps the case in the public eye, forcing transparency and discouraging interference. Marcus nodded. And it forces Caldwell to respond carefully, or crack under scrutiny. Threats began to emerge. Anonymous phone calls, shadowy figures near Olivia's home, and surveillance of Marcus while off duty. Each encounter was a reminder. The investigation was dangerous, but the stakes were moral, historical, and personal. "We're close to the truth," Olivia said to Marcus during a late-night review of timelines. "Every flashback, every witness, every piece of evidence, it's all pointing to Caldwell's orchestration. But he'll fight, hard. That's why we have to be meticulous, no mistakes." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've made it this far. We're ready for whatever comes next." Olivia stared at the timeline pinned to the wall. The overlap of 1998 events, Rachel's memories, Lydia's observations, and forensic breakthroughs from Nassau. The complexity of the case was daunting, but for the first time she could see a path forward. Grace Whitman's story, long buried in whispers and fear, was finally coming into the light. The early morning sunlight spilled over Charleston's historic rooftops, casting long shadows on the quiet streets. Detective Olivia Kane and Marcus Hale sat in an unmarked SUV, parked discreetly across from the elegant Caldwell estate. Months of meticulous investigation had led to this moment, the culmination of years of cold case work, forensic breakthroughs, and unyielding determination. Aaron Caldwell, the wealthy businessman whose polished public persona had masked decades of deceit, was about to face the consequences of his actions. Olivia glanced at Marcus, her eyes steady but betraying the adrenaline she felt. "Everything's in place?" she asked. Marcus nodded, checking the folder of evidence once more. Lydia Caldwell's statement, bank records, photographs, forensic reports, they've all been verified. Once we go in, it's airtight. Their target would be surprised, but not unprepared. Lydia Caldwell, Aaron's spouse, had finally agreed to cooperate fully, providing insider details that had dismantled the layers of lies her husband had carefully built over decades. Olivia felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The arrest wasn't just about bringing Aaron in, it was about showing the world that even the most powerful couldn't escape justice. The house loomed ahead, sprawling and manicured, a fortress of wealth and status. Aaron, 72 now, still carried himself with an air of untouchable confidence, though Olivia knew that it had been cracked from the inside. She adjusted her badge and radio. "We move on my mark," she whispered. Moments later, Lydia opened the front door, eyes wide but resolute. She nodded once to Olivia. "He's inside, in his study," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, betraying the fear and decades of complicity she had endured. "He doesn't know I've spoken." Olivia's heart rate quickened. This was it. Carefully, she and Marcus approached the door, badges displayed, authoritative voices ready. "Aaron Caldwell, Charleston PD and FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest." The calm, polished facade of Aaron faltered for just a fraction of a second before his voice came, smooth but tight. "I want my lawyer," he said, as if mere words could shield him from what was inevitable. "That's your right," Olivia replied firmly. "But you're coming with us. It's time to answer for Grace Whitman and the others you tried to hide from the world." Within moments, agents moved efficiently, taking Aaron Caldwell into custody. The cameras of local news outlets had already arrived, capturing the first real glimpse of the man who had eluded justice for decades. His eyes flicked toward Lydia, who looked away, her hands trembling. Aaron's carefully constructed empire of influence, charm, and intimidation had finally begun to crumble in real time. Back at the precinct, Aaron was processed and placed in an interview room under the watchful eyes of Olivia and Marcus. He remained calm, but there was a brittle edge to his composure. "Detective Kane," he began smoothly, "I assume you understand the severity of accusing someone like me without proof." Olivia leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "We have proof, Mr. Caldwell. DNA evidence, bank records, witness statements, and confessions. You've spent decades hiding behind wealth and influence." "Not anymore." Aaron's lips pressed into a thin line. Silence filled the room for a tense moment. The weight of inevitability pressed down on him, a reminder that power could shield a man from gossip, but not from truth. The news spread quickly. By mid-morning, the public knew Aaron Caldwell had been arrested for the murder of Grace Whitman, for conspiring to cover it up, and for obstruction of justice. Social media exploded with outrage, old whispers of his involvement in political and business scandals resurfacing alongside the shocking revelation of murder. For Emily Whitman, Grace's sister, the arrest was a relief, tempered with the somber reality that the truth, though delayed, was finally within reach. Preparations for the trial moved swiftly. Ada Claire Rojas took the lead, coordinating with Olivia, Marcus, and forensic specialist Dr. Lena Foster. They meticulously organized the evidence that would tell the story of Grace Whitman's life, disappearance, and murder, anchoring it in the documents, DNA results, photographs, and witness testimonies they had fought so hard to collect. The courtroom drama was poised to unveil the full narrative for the first time in decades. Judge Walter Penn, known for his intolerance of media interference, was assigned to preside over the trial. He had little patience for theatrics, ensuring the proceedings would remain orderly. Jonathan Pierce, Aaron's formidable defense attorney, prepared a legal strategy focused on discrediting witnesses, casting doubt on forensic methods, and leveraging Aaron's political connections to paint him as a victim of a sensationalized investigation. But the weight of decades of evidence would prove difficult to challenge. On the first day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Cameras recorded every detail, journalists like Maya Reed reporting live for The Nation. Emily Whitman and Rachel Myers took their seats, the visible strength of survivors and witnesses ready to confront the man who had destroyed a life so many years ago. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. The prosecution opened with a statement designed to both inform and captivate. Grace Whitman was more than a victim. She was a vibrant young woman full of life, hopes, and dreams. Her life was stolen by a man who thought he could hide behind wealth and influence. Today, we will uncover the truth. Today, we will demand justice. Forensic specialist Dr. Lena Foster was called to the stand first. She explained the cutting-edge techniques used to link Aaron Caldwell to the crime, including DNA evidence discovered from preserved samples, cross-referenced with newly obtained evidence from Lydia Caldwell's personal documents. Each exhibit was carefully presented. Photographs, bank transfer records to cover up the crime, Lydia's statements, and letters from Grace herself that had been unearthed from old evidence files. The jury listened intently as Olivia and Marcus provided context for each item. "This isn't just paper and DNA," Olivia told the court. "Each piece tells a story of a young woman's last days, of deceit, of power used to manipulate and hide the truth. Each piece is proof that this crime cannot be forgotten." Rachel Myers was next. Taking the stand, she recounted the night of Grace's disappearance with painstaking detail. Her voice trembled as she admitted what she had previously withheld out of fear and loyalty. "I didn't tell anyone because I was scared," Rachel said softly, tears brimming. "I thought I'd get in trouble, but I remember everything. Grace trusted me and I failed her by keeping quiet. Now I have to tell the truth." The flashbacks began to weave through the courtroom testimonies, projected as visual reconstructions. Grace's laughter in her last days, the secret meetings, the nights when Aaron Caldwell's reach extended far beyond what anyone knew. The jury saw the contrast between the vibrant young woman and the shadow of manipulation that had ensnared her. Emily Whitman testified with poise, describing the emotional toll of the past 24 years. "Every day, I lived with questions, with nightmares about what happened to my sister," she said, her voice steady but charged with grief. "For decades, I was ignored, silenced, and told to move on. But Grace's life deserves more than that. She deserves justice, even if it comes decades later." Jonathan Pierce attempted to undermine the credibility of both witnesses, but their sincerity and corroborated accounts proved difficult to dismiss. Each interruption and objection was met with clear, firm direction from Judge Penn, who ensured the court focused on the evidence rather than theatrics. Lydia Caldwell was called to testify, her statement carefully coordinated with the prosecution. She described her growing suspicions over the years, the incriminating actions she uncovered, and the moral decision to come forward despite her fear. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I stayed silent for years because I loved him, because I feared him. But the truth had to come out. Grace Whitman deserved better, and I could not let another decade pass without doing what was right." As the trial progressed, Olivia and Marcus faced constant scrutiny and subtle threats from individuals seeking to protect Aaron Caldwell. But their resolve never wavered. Public interest intensified, fueled by Maya Reed's reporting, which exposed every layer of concealment, every effort to obstruct justice, and every step taken to finally uncover the truth. The flashbacks alternated with present-day courtroom proceedings, illustrating the full scope of Aaron Caldwell's crimes. Viewers, both in the courtroom and watching through media coverage, were given a complete picture. Grace's last days, the manipulation, the intimidation, and the eventual unraveling of a powerful man's carefully constructed lies. Forensic evidence culminated in the presentation of Lydia's discovery of artifacts linked to Aaron Caldwell. Letters from Grace detailing her interactions with him, photographs of clandestine meetings, and bank records revealing the payments intended to cover up the crime. Dr. Foster's testimony tied these items conclusively to Caldwell, leaving little room for doubt. The trial extended over weeks, each day unearthing more of the decades-old truth. Witnesses, some reluctant but compelled by justice, told stories that had been silenced for too long. Emily Whitman's testimony connected past to present, highlighting the emotional devastation of losing a sister and the decades of unanswered questions. Finally, after meticulous arguments from Ada Claire Rojas and relentless cross-examination by Jonathan Pierce, the case moved to closing statements. Rojas spoke with passion, weaving together the narratives, evidence, and emotional weight of the crime. "This trial is not just about Aaron Caldwell. It is about Grace Whitman, about her stolen life, about the lies that covered it for decades. The jury has seen the evidence. The jury knows the truth. It is time to ensure that justice delayed is not justice denied." The courtroom fell into silence as Judge Penn instructed the jury on their duties. Days later, the verdict was announced. Guilty on all counts. Aaron Caldwell, the man who had manipulated, intimidated, and ultimately destroyed Grace Whitman's life, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The relief in the courtroom was palpable, though tempered by the decades of pain endured by the Whitman family and survivors like Rachel Myers. The courthouse had emptied hours ago, leaving behind only the echoes of proceedings that had changed lives. Outside, the crisp autumn air carried a sense of finality, yet it was not the end, it was a beginning. Detective Olivia Kane stood quietly on the courthouse steps, watching Emily Whitman embrace Rachel Myers. The relief in their eyes, the subtle trembling of their hands, spoke volumes. Grace Whitman had finally been seen, her story told, and her murderer held accountable. For the first time in 24 years, justice had been served. Emily Whitman's gaze met Olivia's, and in it, Olivia saw a mixture of exhaustion, grief, and profound gratitude. Emily had carried the weight of unanswered questions for decades, watching life pass by while clinging to hope that one day someone would uncover the truth about her sister. Olivia had been that someone. And now, standing on these steps with the sun slanting across the city, she felt the depth of the responsibility she had shouldered. It was more than a job. It was a mission to ensure that the voices silenced by violence were finally heard. "I don't know how to thank you, Detective Kane," Emily whispered, clutching Olivia's hands as if holding on to a lifeline. You gave me something I thought I'd never have. Closure. For Grace, for me, for our family." Olivia squeezed her hands in return, a small smile playing across her face. "You didn't need to thank me. You never gave up. You kept her memory alive. I just made sure the world knew who she was." Rachel Myers, standing nearby, wiped a tear from her cheek. "And you kept the promise you made to all of us, Olivia. Grace mattered to you, like she mattered to her family." She paused, looking down at the steps with a shadowed expression. "It wasn't easy, was it?" Olivia shook her head. "No, it never is, but the hard work, the sleepless nights, the roadblocks, they all led here. This, what we've done, it's why we do this job." The three of them lingered for a few more moments, watching as the courthouse steps gradually cleared. Reporters hovered at the edge of the plaza, but Olivia had learned to navigate their presence over the years. Maya Reed, the true crime journalist who had followed the case from the early reopening, approached with her camera crew in tow, notebook in hand. "Detective Kane," Maya said, her voice even but charged with energy. "The public is eager to hear your thoughts. Grace Whitman's case has captivated the city and the nation. How does it feel to have solved a case that's been cold for 24 years? Olivia met Maya's gaze steadily. "It's a bittersweet victory. We can never bring Grace back. We can never erase the pain that her family endured while the truth was hidden. But what we can do is ensure that her life, her story, and her legacy are honored. Justice has been served, and that matters." Maya nodded, scribbling furiously in her notebook. "And what about the others affected by this? Rachel Myers, Emily, how do you see their lives moving forward?" Emily spoke before Olivia could answer. "For me, it's about carrying on Grace's legacy, about making sure her life wasn't wasted, that her story inspires others. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I do know I want to make sure she's remembered." The morning light shifted, illuminating the steps in golden hues, and Olivia felt a pang of satisfaction mingled with the lingering melancholy that always followed the conclusion of a high-stakes case. There was closure here, yes, but the memory of Grace Whitman, of the lost years, and of the countless others who might still be waiting, lingered in her mind like an echo. Later that week, a memorial was held at Magnolia Cemetery, a small, intimate gathering where family, friends, and community members paid their respects to Grace Whitman. The ceremony was officiated by Reverend Thomas Avery, who had been present at Grace's funeral decades prior. He now spoke with the weight of years and the knowledge that justice, however delayed, had finally been achieved. Grace Whitman's life, though tragically cut short, has reminded us all of the enduring power of truth, Reverend Avery said. Her story is not one of despair, but of courage. Courage that her sister, her friends, and those who pursued justice never abandoned. Today, we honor not only Grace, but the unyielding determination of those who ensured her voice was heard. Emily Whitman, supported by her grandniece Amanda, placed a bouquet of white roses atop Grace's newly installed headstone. The marble gleamed under the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the decades of shadows that had concealed the truth. Amanda, now 27, reflected the same age Grace had been when her life was taken, a symbolic reminder of the unbroken circle of legacy and memory. Amanda spoke quietly, almost to herself. "Grace taught me about hope, about learning, about believing in people even when the world seemed unfair. This scholarship, this memorial, it's our way of making sure her spirit lives on." The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Emily, Amanda, Rachel, and Olivia together near the gravesite. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared acknowledgement of the pain, perseverance, and ultimate triumph that had brought them here. That evening, back at her apartment, Olivia Kane reflected on the months, even years, that had led to this moment. She sat alone on her balcony, Charleston's skyline stretching before her, the soft murmur of the city below filling the quiet spaces of her thoughts. She poured a glass of wine, feeling the tension slowly release from her shoulders. Yet, even in this moment of calm, her mind was already turning toward the future, toward the next case, the next voice that might need to be heard. Her phone buzzed with a message from Roar. Another cold case had come up in Nassau, bodies discovered at the site of a long-abandoned hotel. Olivia read the note carefully, her pulse quickening with the familiar thrill of a new investigation. But she paused, looking out over the city. She would take a few days for reflection, to honor the work done, and to ensure Emily and the Whitman family felt the peace they deserved. Only then would she pick up the next thread. 2 weeks later, news reached Olivia that Emily Whitman had decided to establish a scholarship in Grace's name, the Grace Whitman Memorial Scholarship for Future Educators. The initiative aimed to provide young women with the opportunity to pursue careers in education, echoing Grace's own life and passion for teaching. The scholarship had already raised over $30,000, and Emily's vision promised to create a lasting impact on countless lives. Olivia attended the scholarship's inaugural ceremony, standing alongside Amanda and Rachel as Reverend Avery spoke again, this time in celebration rather than remembrance. Students, teachers, and members of the community gathered, each bearing witness to the legacy that Grace Whitman had inadvertently inspired. This scholarship represents more than academic opportunity, Reverend Avery said. It represents hope, resilience, and the power of perseverance. Grace Whitman's life was stolen, but her spirit endures through every young woman who will be educated, empowered, and inspired in her name. Emily stepped forward, addressing the crowd with poise that belied the years of grief she had carried. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said softly. "For decades I lived with the weight of not knowing. But thanks to the dedication of Detective Olivia Kane, Marcus Hale, Dr. Lena Foster, Ada Claire Rojas, and so many others who refused to let Grace's case die, we finally have answers. Grace's story is no longer hidden, and through this scholarship her life will continue to touch others, shaping futures she never got to see." Olivia felt a lump in her throat as she watched the students filing applications for the scholarship, each one unknowingly connected to Grace's legacy. She thought about the countless victims whose cases had been closed, reopened, or still languishing in dusty files. This was why she did what she did. Not for recognition, not for accolades, but to ensure that justice, remembrance, and dignity were preserved for those who could no longer fight for themselves. As the ceremony concluded, Olivia returned to her car with Marcus, both of them sharing a quiet moment of reflection. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Marcus said, his voice low, almost reverent. Olivia nodded, gazing at the empty chairs and the white roses glinting in the sun. "It does, but there's always more work to do. Always another voice waiting to be heard." That night, back at her apartment, Olivia opened the file Rohr had sent from Nassau. The photographs of the abandoned hotel and the discovery site hinted at a case that was already old, yet had never been fully resolved. She traced her finger along the map, noting locations, access points, and signs of disturbance. Her pulse quickened. The thrill of discovery, the tension of investigation. It was all there, just waiting for her to begin. She placed the file on her desk and poured a fresh cup of coffee. Staring out at the city lights, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on Grace Whitman, the Whitman family, and the journey that had spanned decades. She thought about the relentless pursuit of truth, the courage of survivors, and the delicate balance of hope and perseverance that defined cold case investigations. Her phone rang. It was Emily. "Olivia," she said, her voice calm but filled with warmth. "I just wanted you to know the scholarship. Grace would be proud, and so am I. Thank you for everything." Olivia smiled, closing her eyes briefly. "No, Emily, thank you, for never giving up on her, for never letting the world forget." As she hung up, Olivia allowed herself a deep breath. Another case would come, as it always did. Another family would wait. Another voice would be silenced if no one listened. But she was ready. She would continue. Because justice, no matter how long delayed, was worth every effort, every sleepless night, every painful memory unearthed. And in the quiet, she whispered a promise to Grace Whitman and to every victim who had been forgotten. "We will remember. We will seek the truth. We will not stop." The city slept beneath her balcony, Charleston's streets glistening under a silver moon. And in the stillness, Olivia Kane prepared for the next call, the next clue, the next cold case that would demand her unwavering attention. Grace Whitman's legacy would live on, not just through the scholarship, but through every action, every conviction, and every story that refused to fade into obscurity. Because justice, though delayed, would never be denied. And somewhere across the ocean, in Nassau, a new mystery waited. Thank you for joining us in uncovering stories hidden in the shadows. Every victim deserves to be remembered. Every truth deserves to be told. To follow more cold cases, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share these stories. Your support helps keep their voices alive.